Today's episode of On Orbit is brought to you by AVL Technologies, an industry-leading manufacturer of multi-band and multi-orbit satellite communications ground terminals for military, government, and commercial applications. AVL's visionary approach to engineering and designing mobile satellite antenna technology incorporates customer collaboration, along with superior service and support to ensure that customer requirements are met for today's most important missions. AVL products feature reflector sizes ranging from 60 centimeters to 5 meters, and enable efficient and cost-effective video, voice, and data connectivity without the need for specialized training. For more information on AVL's reliable and rapidly deployable multi-band, multi-orbit satellite systems, visit avltech.com. That's avltech.com. Thank you so much, and enjoy this episode of On Orbit.
This week, I'm joined by my colleagues Jeff Hill and Mark Holmes to hear about their trip last week to Paris for the World Space Business Week conference. The annual September show was at a particularly interesting time this year, just a month after the Olympics and weeks before the US presidential election. One of the key themes that Jeff and Mark talk about in this episode is just how much the industry is grappling with SpaceX dominance and how to compete with SpaceX in launch, satellite communications, and even Earth observation with Starshield. There are so many interesting storylines in the works right now, with new rockets coming online, satellite operator mergers, and the evolving discussion around standards. So we're going to get into all of those issues. I'm Rachel Jewett, and you're listening to On Orbit, the podcast that asks, what's our future in space? Hey, Mark and Jeff, thank you guys for joining me today on Orbit. Welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here.
Thanks, Rachel, for having us.
Yeah, so you guys were both in Paris last week for the Nova Space World Space Business Week, and I wasn't able to go this year, but I wanted to have you guys on to hear a little bit more about the week. So you were both reporting there, and I've edited and read your work, and I was reading dispatches from other people, other journalists there, and yeah, I just wanted to hear about the week. So to start us off, just tell me, overall, what kind of your general impressions were of the World Space Business Week. And then I also know this was the first year for the Space Defense and Security Summit. So Mark, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. It was great for me to be back at the event. I wasn't there last year, so it's 2 years since I've been in Paris. So as we know, a lot has changed in 2 years in our industry. So it was good to be back. I mean, there's lots of observations, but I'll highlight sort of one or two to start with. I think what was interesting was the talk around the launch market. I think with these new rockets coming online this year, Ariane 6, Vulcan, New Glenn Heavy, I think we're seeing the dynamics of the market maybe shift a little bit for the first time. It feels like with a number of markets, SpaceX has dominated this one in particular, but that's partly through lack of alternatives. And now it seems at long last we are, seeing some alternatives. Okay, some of those rockets have been delayed, but they're here now. Maybe better late than never, but they're here. And so I think that was definitely a discussion that was. That I think provoked some interest. I mean, Arianespace had a press event as well, which they're very keen to promote Ariane 6 as well, and really try and give a healthy picture of what they see as future business. So that would be the first point. The second point, and again, it probably goes with sort of the name change of the event. I mean, this is the first time it's been called World Space Business Week rather than World Satellite Business Week, and there definitely felt like more of an orientation towards space-based content as well as satellites. I think it was. I wouldn't necessarily say it was a direct theme. It was perhaps a little bit more overt, but there was definitely. I felt there was more talk about space than in previous versions of the event. So I think that was another point I would make. Other one would be, and this was a panel I didn't attend, so I'm talking a little bit sort of based on conversations I had. I think the dynamics of the satellite manufacturing market is super interesting right now. I feel like in some ways it gets a little bit lost because we tend to focus, dare I say it, fixate on what the operators are doing, and because we've seen lots of consolidation there, lots of deals being done, and whenever you see a deal involving like the likes of like United or John Deere and Starlink winning those deals, um, they tend to gain a lot of industry headlines, which is understandable. But actually, I think the future of the satellite manufacturing market, and this really links back to what we've seen in VIA with the popularity with the future of geo articles that we've had, and people trying to sort of figure out what is the future of geo. I mean, if are we, is there still a bright future? What kinds of orders are we going to get, and how is it all going to shake out? So, I think even though it probably wasn't a topic as such, I think that's an area that maybe just gets a little bit lost because, as I said, I think we all tend to sort of concentrate more on the operators and things like that. But I think that's a very, that's an area definitely of interest going forward. So they were sort of I guess, some of my initial observations anyway of what went on last week.
One that I want to talk about all of those, but on the World Space Business Week, I'm wondering if it's just kind of like a branding thing to make to have space is a broader word than satellite, which is more niche, but I feel like really when we're talking about, countries investing in their space capabilities, it's having satellites in space and having launch access to space. But I mean, space is obviously it's a broader term. Jeff, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's mostly a audience marketing shift. I think everybody's making the shift from if they're branded a satellite event, you start talking about space, and I think that is just a result of more a wider variety of people and industries attending these satellite events. The difference in terms of like content right now isn't as drastic, right? Because what is space? Space is low Earth orbit and geostationary satellites, the ISS, and some lunar programs, right? That's what space is. With the NASA research stuff, right? With the academic stuff. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's still largely, all of the money in space is still largely dominated by satellites, but I guess it's a preparation for this sort of future where there could be other applications in space. That's my take on it. But the conversations at World Space Business Week were still very largely dominated by mm-hmm. satellite services and manufacturing, the whole supply chain.
On the launch issue that you brought up, Mark, I think that's a really important one to note. For a couple of years, it was like, wait and see. Oh, is Ariane 6 going to launch this year? Is Vulcan going to launch this year? And then this is the year that we actually have seen both of those rockets launch. And we will likely see Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket launch this year as well. So it's kind of like 2024 is the landmark year for these new rockets, but it is going to take these companies a while to ramp up and actually bring them into meaningful service. We haven't seen the second launch of either of those yet. I know that they talked about that on the launch panel that you reported on, that, both companies are working toward the second launch. So they will bring more options to the market than the Falcon 9, which has, obviously been carrying all of the launch capacity in recent years. But yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time for those to ramp up.
Yeah, I would just add that, one of the things we tend to see in satellite is let's wait in a couple of years. We're still a couple of years away from things. It wasn't that long ago we were waiting for constellations to go up, and we were saying, oh, we're talking, the Leo revolution hasn't happened. Then all of a sudden it does happen, and it feels like the launch market has been in a sort of state of flux for a little while now, partly because of this wait and see. So, it's clear that these rockets are not going to launch at the same levels of what SpaceX is launching. But I think just having, competition in the market is good. And I would say on the launch as well, and again, it maybe went a little bit under the radar, but Eutelsat's deal with MHI, I think, was significant. I think I mean, SpaceX has done many, many good things for this industry. They've disrupted it in ways that I don't think even seasoned observers and professionals are probably surprised just at the level of disruption that they've managed. But you need competition. You need other rockets. You need operators to get deals as well. So, the Eutelsat one was an interesting one. So we'll see if this translates. And there are other rockets as well that are scheduled to launch. So, when we highlight those three because they were the three on a panel and were talked about. But ultimately, there is a huge demand, as we know, for launching satellites right now. So, the better options there are in the market, the better for the industry. And these are great historical players as well in Arianespace and ULA anyway. So, it'll be, we're hoping that they can, after the delays that they've had and a couple of tough years, that they can really sort of ramp up, get the second launches done, third, fourth, fifth, and then get reliability in these rockets and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I'm going to go over to you. And what were some of your takeaways from the week?
Well, Mark alluded to this, but I mean, for me, it was immediately like another opportunity for the industry to discuss SpaceX and how to compete with SpaceX. Mm-hmm. Like right from the very beginning with an intro, I thought a presentation from Nova Space's Nathan DeRuyter, which I thought was great. Basically like summed it up as SpaceX is the Apple of our industry. They own IP across an entire tech stack. And, they don't have the make versus buy decision problem. And then there's all this room for an Android that doesn't exist as a competitor to Apple. And that's mainly because, you have the tech stack that's fragmented. You have, disagreements on standards. You have, a lot of challenges on the other side. I think that the industry is very quietly terrified of that situation. There's a couple of reasons there. I mean, first of all, you get kind of lost in SpaceX, whenever they do anything, everyone covers them. Everyone talks about it. Whenever Elon says something, everyone covers it. Everyone talks about it, and everything else goes under the radar. And so, to compete, and then you've got Amazon coming down the pipeline, right? Yeah. So it's like, if you're not run by one of the richest people in the world, what are you going to do, right? Like, what are you going to do? You're going to go to investors and you're going to ask for money or to build a competitive product. You're going to think very much like an engineer, but are you going to go to investors and say, we need $100 million in marketing? No, right? Because investors are like, well, SpaceX does it without marketing budget. Well, SpaceX has, a guy who every time he tweets something crazy has 200 million people, watching him. So yeah, you don't have that. So now you've got to invest in marketing. And, even Mark mentioned the Eutelsat thing, and he started out by saying it might have flown under the radar. Everything flies under the radar that is not related to SpaceX, at least in the general public or the retail investor view. So on the conference side on the WSBW side of the event, that dominated the conversations throughout the entire time I was there. And then on the Space Security Defense Summit side, also talking about, the upcoming U.S. election, I think, is on the back of everyone's mind. The overall message there. Mark wrote a great piece summarizing this for the opening session there. It was all about, unity in terms of, U.S. and its allies, that we're, we're unified in our programs. There's momentum carrying a lot of these programs forward. Stability, no change, but in the back of everyone's mind, we're thinking like, yeah, we still got one company dominating government contracts, and we definitely need some variety in the market. We need stability. It was, I think WSPW and their new space security defense event were benefited from timing before the U.S. election, which carries with it a lot of consequences for these topics.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that the United deal being announced just before the conference, it's just another notch in the SpaceX competition. I mean, that's a deal that I'm sure many of the operators competed on, and it's the first major, large airline that SpaceX has won. Mark, what were you covered the big operator panel. Did you feel like framing a lot of the conversation was around competing with SpaceX?
Yes. It's hard to say. It's hard to say otherwise. It was sort of a strange panel in a way because honestly, I don't think a lot came out of it this year. I think partly because obviously you have the SES Intelsat, and SES wasn't on the panel, so you had Dave representing Intelsat, and I think there's probably a limit to what he can say, and and obviously that any integration cannot really start to happen until the deal is completed. So I mean, it's all we always talk about wait and see, and I think this is another classic example of wait and see. I mean, ultimately that kind of panel going forward, I guess will ultimately have like SES Intelsat, Eutelsat one where Viasat, Inmarsat, and one or two other players as well. So it feels like you may be a year, 2 years away from maybe an optimum lineup of that panel. There was nothing really. There was one moment on the panel where we thought we were going to get into a little bit of a debate or discussion or a disagreement when Mark Dankberg and David Weisgrass were talking about interoperability. That never really materialized. So as I said, I think it's about. I think we're seeing sort of a positioning right now, and I I also suspect that I'm not sure that the consolidation is done either. I think that there could be maybe one more on top of what we've already seen and stuff. But again, that's just a personal opinion. There was nothing on the panel to suggest that. But really, it goes back to customers. I mean, you referenced those deals, United and John Deere, and these were keenly fought deals, and at some point, in the nicest possible way, we want to see a traditional operator give Starlink a bit of a bloody nose and punch back. Because at the moment, the landmark deals in aviation and agriculture are going to Starlink. And that seems to indicate that, their pure LEO approach, the low cost approach that they're taking, is resonating with aviation customers, and it's resonated with the big agriculture customer right now. And of course, there'll be, I mean, there's a number of other contracts, there's a number of smaller aviation contracts that have been won by others. But I think what I would like to see over the next couple of years is that when you get one of these landmark deals that people have been talking about, and in the conversations I've had, everything last year goes, John Deere was the big deal of this year. That's the one that everyone's fighting over. And then once that was announced, it's like going, United is the big aviation. That's the one that everyone is, So what I would like to see, and again, this is nothing against SpaceX, but it's not good for the industry going forward if SpaceX wins every single one of these landmark deals going forward. It's not good for the industry, I don't think. I mean, they may say it is, but the reality of it is you need competition, you need others, winning some of these contracts. So I hope that we start to see one or two of them, punch back a little bit over the next couple of years and find ways in which they can win, whether it's with big aviation customers, maritime customers, or even other verticals, that others can win these landmark deals as well. Because if they don't, then you wonder how all of them can, have
Mhm.
prosperous, profitable, good futures. They need to at some point do that. So yeah, I think, as Jeff said, I think even when SpaceX isn't being mentioned in conversations, they're being thought about, and I think they're sort of, I think they sort of frame so many different things now, um, and I think that operator panel was a classic example. But we'll see. I mean, it wasn't that long ago people, were thinking that Telesat wouldn't get funding, and they got funding. Wasn't that long ago that people thought Eutelsat was in, wondered what their multi-orbit play would be, and they did the OneWeb deal. So, it's always a very optimistic industry. It's one of those things that whenever you go to any panel at any satellite show, it's almost like the outside world doesn't exist, because the satellite industry is always sees it as a very sunny day. There's never sort of um, storms and clouds overhead. They're always very optimistic. They're always think there's lots of demand, lots of government demand, lots of commercial demand, and But I would like to see it, certainly over the next couple of years, maybe a little bit more evidence of it, in terms of hopefully one of the two of these players winning what I would describe as landmark deals, not sort of small regional deals, but actually ones that that are big ones that all of the industry are competing for. So that's
Yeah.
kind of a long-winded answer to your
Yeah.
question, but yeah.
No, thank you for all of that. Yeah. I will say on the agriculture front, because my trip recently was to Farm Progress, which was not a space show, very, very different, is that Intelsat doing the deal with CNH, which has, Case IH and New Holland is the other big. I mean, seeing at the agriculture show, I know that John Deere is like the biggest, most well-known name in the US and probably the global ag industry, but seeing like the size of those brands at the shows, like in their own element. And they were actually promoting the satellite solution. They had a mock-up of the terminal. They were talking about it to customers, whereas Deere, they weren't, which I was pretty surprised to see that, but that's because they only want to talk about what's like in the market right now. But I think that Intelsat winning that shows that this is a market that is still, it's satellite has not proliferated agriculture, and the fact that there's already been some competition is a good sign, and it's really interesting, and that there's room for different operators to go after this market. So, yeah, I think that's one of the things that will just kind of be interesting as it actually rolls out. Deere is working in testing with Starlink. In 2025. They'll really be rolling that out to the market. And then, yeah, there's just a lot of things still moving. We're still seeing Viasat and Inmarsat figure out what it means for them to be one company. OneWeb is just now, ramping up. Eutelsat is like, getting that to the point that it's in commercial service. SES and Intelsat are going through this merger, which is going to take a little bit of time. And, now we're seeing Telesat Lightspeed ramp up, Kuiper ramp up. There's so much happening.
I think people in our industry don't realize, if the ones that are aware of it, there are people that are aware of how big this market is, but I think it's just starting to like rise to the level of widespread consciousness, just how big the agriculture market is, right? Like, I mean, yeah, we have the John Deere Starlink thing, right? But like the Intelsat Case IH, I mean, these are global companies, not just US. These are global companies. And Case IH is the third largest agriculture company in the world, right? And you also have like companies like Kubota in Japan. You have Massey Ferguson. You have New Holland. Like these are huge companies with global presence that represent a market. I mean, there's hundreds of these companies that hundreds of agriculture equipment manufacturers that could use satellite connectivity as an application. So I'm glad to see people like starting to take it seriously. And I heard more conversations about it at World Satellite Business Week. It's starting to like hit people like this is an opportunity. It's not a niche market.
I just want to add to that, because I think you brought up a very good point. And again, it's a point that's sort of being made a lot, is what is the future for multi-orbit? Because, you talk about these companies offering combined offerings over different orbits, and whether that will start to be a competitive advantage. It's clear that you have some operators that just believe they can do everything via LEO. We know who they are. I mean, Telesat, adding to those two, you have Telesat, which will still have some GEO, but is really going big into LEO. So it will be interesting to start to see whether multi-orbit will have some competitive advantages in the eyes of customers, and particularly as you go into sort of new verticals, or whether LEO only solutions can basically do the job and multi-orbit is not a competitive advantage. So I think, again, that's, as you know, Rachel, that's something we talk about constantly in VIA. And it's sort of interesting, because when you look at those two things, when you look at SpaceX and you look at multi-orbit, I feel like those two things, one's a company, one's a term, but I feel like those two things permeate virtually every discussion we seem to have. If it's not related to SpaceX in any way, it's related to multi-orbit. And I think when you talk about these new verticals, and even some of the existing verticals, aviation, I mean, when you talk to satellite companies, or the operators, they will tell you that they think multi-orbit is a competitive advantage over pure LEO. But that still didn't stop United going for a pure LEO. So I think that's something that's very interesting. I think the battle lines are being drawn in a way, and it'll be interesting to see, in agriculture. And the final thing I will say in agriculture is, Rachel, could we have predicted 5 years ago that I'd be going to an agriculture event in London next week and you were going to Farm Progress in Iowa? It's the changing nature of the industry, where the events we go to are not the ones we went to 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, the big broadcast events is a classic example, but there is value for us as editors of Via Satellite to go into these communities and talk, whether it's at Farm Progress or the event that I'm going to actually talk with these communities about how they use satellite. And I think that's a sign of changing times as well.
One aspect of kind of a different side of this competition with SpaceX that I wanted to bring up is one area where premium customer that needs extremely resilient, always there, redundant connectivity is governments and militaries. And that's something that I feel like I was reading in the operator and from the defense side, that governments and militaries, they don't just want, they can't depend on one network. They need a robust industry that has, all these capabilities. So is that something that you guys were hearing on the defense space side?
Absolutely. And I think if you look at the launch, like if you take launch as an example, I mean, the government wants many, many different options. It wants flexibility, reliability. They want to be able to shift and change what the architecture is. If there's we haven't really encountered a major security event outside of some cyber hacking. But there all of these things are in the back of everyone's mind. As space gets more competitive, you definitely want to be able to layer security. You want to be able to guarantee service all over the world seamlessly, and not rely on a single network or a single launcher. And I think, going back to, I saw a key, like a fireside chat early on day 2, Brigadier General Middleton. I mean, they asked him about the Space Force's program, all of the partners that that are competing for Space Force launch contracts, and they asked, and I think Tina Gator from Aerospace Lab was moderating. Her last question was, "Would you be open to like a European launcher?" And Brigadier General Middleton said, "We're open to everything. We're open to anybody who can provide a competitive, reliable service." And that did not come with the, asterisk, as long as they're in the U.S., right? Like that, it was basically like, we understand this is the commercial space industry is globalized, and that's what we have to do. We have to put together a menu of best options.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
yes, to answer your question, yes. And that was pretty unanimous across the different military themed panels. And that ranges from terminals to launch services to connectivity services to ISR, everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was a quote that you pulled out in your story from Brigadier General Middleton that I thought was awesome. "Unfortunately, there's no such thing as U.S. Internet Command. We could use a better MilSatCom strategy to meet our future requirements." I mean, yeah, and I wrote earlier this year about these new commercial space acquisition strategies from the DoD, and one of the things that a lot of people talked about was that the way the military acquires SATCOM, and to do that in like a more flexible way, it's very much evolving and it could improve a lot. So I think that as satellite capabilities are getting better, the military, wants that, and they're also figuring out how that works for them.
I mean, the process has been evolving for forever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's been evolving for at least the last 15 years. The needs and requirements are changing faster than they were before. And, I think, yes, the government, the military side, they have to adjust to the availability of the market, but also, the operators have to do a better job of communicating how they can meet those requirements. I mean, that's just that, right? Like at Satellite 2024, our most popular session on our government military program was MilSatCom alternatives to Starlink. And that wasn't a knock on Starlink. It was just that the military needs more than Starlink, right? Like, and I know it's like the most visible system there, but we've got to show the rest of the industry has to show how they can meet those requirements.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'll just add just very quickly. I think this all comes about because it's noticeable, and it's not just in the US, that there's been a huge uptick in spending on these sorts of things. I mean, I think with the current geopolitical situation, it seems to have kicked a lot of governments into gear and increasing their funding and in building their defense capabilities through space. And I think even a small percentage increase is hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of extra investments in capability. So I think you are still seeing that start to sort of filter down in a way, so I think it's just a sad consequence of what we've seen over the last 2 years. And yes, it is, it's, I suppose, good news for the industry, but it's not good because we're all living in a volatile world, and we could probably do without the volatility that we're seeing. But there is a direct correlation with what we're seeing and the increase in spending in defense-based capabilities, and particularly those that involve space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for telling me about, having this discussion about some of the takeaways. To end on a lighter note, I wanted to ask you guys if there was anything, any fun stories from Paris, any foods that you really liked. Did you got to do any sightseeing that you really enjoyed? Give me give me a little flavor of Paris.
I can give you two things. As you know, I'm probably not the best person to talk about food, so I won't go there. The interesting thing for me was going there just after the Olympics and seeing all the stands, everything sort of fenced off. It was almost like here's the party you could have gone to, but you've missed. So you're walking around and there's still the remnants of what of the Olympics, the um the temporary stands and things like that. So it sort of felt like I remember walking around and it was like, it was like being, missing the actual party and then walking around in the after party. So I kind of felt that a couple of times. I did manage to go to a museum right at the back end of the trip, which was nice. It was called, and then you'll have to excuse my French, Atelier de Lumière, which was an interactive light display museum, and they had something on it, ancient Egypt. It was absolutely brilliant couple of hours. I mean, I'm beginning to really like these types of museums where, there's, the use of light and images all around you and, on the ceiling, on the floors, to the sides. And I like very immersive experiences. And that was something a little bit different. So I did enjoy that. But yeah, definitely the post-Olympics. I don't think I've ever been to an event so close after the Olympics before. So there was that sort of sense. And I remember trying to find, this will make you laugh. I sort of told my family, I said, "Oh, I think there's an Olympic gift shop. I'll see if I can, buy one or two late things." And I was walking around this, and this shop is completely fenced around. And I walked around it twice. Clearly, the shop had closed, and
It
there was
wasn't open. Yeah.
but I was determined to try and get in it and buy something. But alas, my efforts were doomed to a rather ignominious failure. So I walked around twice to this fenced off um, souvenir shop to see if I could buy Paris Olympic merch. But alas, I was foiled in my efforts. Foiled in my efforts.
Funny. Jeff, you sent me some pictures of the post-Olympic, the stuff that was still out.
Yeah. It was really cool for a few pictures and to be like, wow, the Olympics were just here. But I will say that if you went to World Space Business Week and this was your first time in Paris, like you got a completely different experience of Paris than you would any other time. And I would encourage you to go back because like the plastic cord was completely, it was completely shut off. That's like right in the middle of the city, actually right across the street from the Westin, and no traffic. It was just like bleachers, fencing and construction, and the Luxor obelisk was like almost like half boarded up from all of the stage set, and then you had the Arc de Triomphe completely, like that whole walkway under the arc shut off.
Oh, wow.
You had the Eiffel Tower, like had the Olympic rings, and that was cool. But it really was like all the barricades were still up, and I can see why Parisians are a little frustrated with the traffic situation because you can't get anywhere in a car. And even right now in Paris, the traffic is really bad. So I would just encourage anyone who went there for the first time for this event, go back, because it really is. Paris is an very open city, very walkable city, and it was. It's cool to be there for the Olympics, but I kind of
very
prefer
interesting.
the open. Yeah.
Awesome. Any final thoughts?
Just one. I think there's never been a more difficult time to discuss business development in the commercial satellite industry. And I think that if you are sitting out there saying like, I have no idea what happens on the other side of this US election, you're not alone. Like you're not everybody in the back of their mind. I know this industry likes to remain outside of politics for now, the most part, but you've got the CEO of one of the major companies, like could potentially like be on a presidential cabinet after this, right? So it's World Space Business Week really, what I saw a definite like chasm between global players and regional players, where regional players are more confident, they know their markets, there's a little bit more relaxation, I guess, among them, that they're not so dependent on global business working with many different governments. But people who are planning global strategies right now, I sympathize with you. What do you do beyond the next couple of months here? And we're kind of coming up to the end of the year, and then it's going to be like crunch time with some of these new systems coming online, with Amazon coming online. Everybody agrees the market is there, but who's going to get that market? How fast is it going to be? How fast are the markets going to adopt these strategies? Nobody really knows. So I think where the optimism of the last 5 years has waned a bit, and just now where it's crunch time, and the environment is not as easy or friendly as everyone may have thought, and that makes discussions like World Space Business Week more important, because we have to start addressing those challenges.
I'll add very, very quickly that it never sort of fails to surprise me just how many people read via satellite, and that's always a nice thing whenever you go to these events. And a little bit of a shameless plug, but people coming up to us and being appreciative of the work that we do and the writing we do, and I know that as journalists we're often in a little bubble in our own little world, putting stories, podcasts, all kinds of things together for this community. And so it's always nice to know that people enjoy our work, respect what we do, and and that our work hopefully makes a difference. And it was nice to hear that on a few occasions. And even though you weren't there, Rachel, people were missing you. They love your work and love what you do. So I'm sure hopefully you'll be back soon and stuff. But yeah, that was just one final takeaway.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you, guys. And if you've made it this far, listeners, also today and tomorrow we are dropping our October edition. We have a big interview with Intelsat CEO Dave Weisgross. Talks a lot about these issues we've been talking about in this podcast. So make sure you find that. It'll be very interesting. All right. Thank you, Mark and Jeff. It was great to have you guys on.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.